There's a quiet shift happening in the way people feel. Not loud, not dramatic, almost invisible. You still show up. You still reply. You still exist in conversations, relationships, routines, but something inside you has changed. The reactions that once came naturally now feel delayed. The emotions that once flooded you now arrive, muted. And you can't quite tell when it started. There are small moments you barely notice at first. Like when someone says something that would have stayed in your mind all day, and this time it just passes through you. Or when you see a message late, and instead of feeling that familiar urgency, you just look at it, pause, and decide to reply later. No overthinking. No emotion el rus. Just distance. Was it after being misunderstood one too many times? After giving too much of yourself to people who only knew how to take? Or did it happen slowly? So slowly that you only noticed it when you realized you don't feel things the same way anymore? Here's the strange part. You're not cold. You're not heartless. You're not broken. But you are different. So what is this feeling, really? Is it growth? Or is it something else? And if you've become more emotionally detached, is that a sign of strength or a quiet form of self-protection? There's a version of you that used to feel everything intensely. You cared deeply. You reacted quickly. You invested emotionally without calculating the cost. You believed that if something mattered to you, it deserved your full presence. But over time, something shifted. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring started to cost you more than it gave back. And this is where emotional detachment often begins, not as a decision, but as a response. A response to emotional burnout. When your mind realizes that constant emotional engagement leads to exhaustion, it begins to adapt. Not dramatically, not consciously, but quietly. You start practicing something that feels like distance, but is actually self-restraint. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. Instead of expressing everything, you hold back. Instead of seeking validation, you observe. And from the outside, it can look like you've become distant. But internally, something more complex is happening. We live in a world that rewards emotional visibility. You're expected to express, react, respond, and share constantly. There's an unspoken belief that if you're not openly emotional, you must be disconnected. That silence means indifference. That calmness means you don't care enough. But what if that's not true? What if your silence isn't emptiness, but awareness? What if your emotional detachment isn't a lack of feeling, but a shift in where those feelings are directed? Because here's the contradiction no one talks about. Some of the most emotionally aware people appear the most detached, not because they feel less, but because they feel more and have learned the weight of it. Emotional detachment often gets misunderstood as avoidance, but in many cases it's actually about psychological ownership. It's the moment you stop outsourcing your emotional state to other people. Before, your mood could be shaped by how someone treated you, a message ignored, a tone misunderstood, a gesture misread. Your emotional world was, in subtle ways, controlled by external signals. But now, something has changed. You've started reclaiming your locus of control. You no longer feel the need to react to everything. You no longer chase explanations for every shift in someone's behavior. You no longer depend on external validation to stabilize your internal state. And because of that, your reactions have softened, not disappeared, just become more intentional. But here's where it gets complicated. Not all detachment is healthy. Sometimes what feels like peace is actually emotional fatigue. Sometimes what feels like control is actually fear of vulnerability. And sometimes what feels like growth is actually self-protection wearing a more acceptable face. So how do you tell the difference? You don't ask, "Am I detached?" You ask, "Why?" Are you calm because you've found internal stability? Or are you quiet because you've learned that expressing yourself leads to disappointment? Are you at peace? Or are you just tired? There's a subtle shift that happens when detachment becomes a defense mechanism. You stop expecting too much. You stop reacting too quickly. You stop investing too deeply. And at first, it feels like freedom. because you're no longer emotionally dependent. You're no longer easily shaken. But over time, something else can emerge. A quiet distance, not just from others, but from yourself. Because when you suppress emotional highs to avoid emotional lows, you don't just eliminate pain, you also dull connection. And this is the paradox of emotional detachment. Protects you, but it can also isolate you. Still, not all distance is disconnection. There is a form of detachment that isn't about shutting down, but about seeing clearly. A kind of emotional awareness where you no longer get lost in every feeling. Where you can experience emotion without being controlled by it. Where you can care without collapsing. This is where detachment becomes something else entirely. Not avoidance, but clarity. Think about the difference between noise and silence. Noise demands attention, pulls you in. It reacts. It amplifies. Silence, observe. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is being processed more deeply. And in the same way, emotional detachment doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means presence without performance. In a world that constantly pushes you to react, emotional detachment can feel like resistance. A refusal to perform emotions just to meet expectations. A decision, conscious or not, to prioritize authenticity over approval. Because not every feeling needs to be displayed. Not every thought needs to be shared. Not every reaction needs to be immediate. And this is where identity begins to shift. You move from being someone who reacts to someone who reflects. But even reflection has its limits. Because at the core of every detached state, there's still something deeply human. A need to be understood. A desire to connect. A quiet hope that someone, somewhere, will see you. Not just your calmness, but what exists beneath it. And maybe that's the part that doesn't change. No matter how detached you become, there is always a part of you that wants to feel safely. So the question isn't whether emotional detachment is good or bad. It's whether it's honest. Is it helping you stay grounded, or is it helping you stay hidden? Is it bringing you closer to yourself, or further away from what you actually feel? Because real emotional strength doesn't come from feeling nothing. It comes from being able to feel without losing yourself in it. To care without needing control. To connect without losing your identity. And sometimes that looks like detachment. Not as a wall, but as a boundary. In the end, emotional detachment isn't a destination. It's a phase, a response, a reflection of where you've been and what you've learned to protect. Can be a sign of healing, or a sign that something inside you is still trying to heal. And maybe you don't need to label it just yet. Maybe it's enough to simply notice it, to sit with it, to understand that not everything meaningful needs to be loud, expressive, or visible. Some things, like growth, awareness, quiet strength, they happen in silence. And maybe that's not detachment at all. Maybe that's you finally learning how to stay.